Welcome back to App Stories. Today's show is brought to you by Sofa, Daylight, and Squarespace. I'm John Voorhees, and with me is Federico Viticci. Hi, Federico.
Hello, John. How are you?
I'm doing really well. We had a really good pre-show today for our App Stories Plus subscribers about Whisper AI and some experiments you and I have been running in converting App Stories episodes from audio to text. And it's got me kind of in the groove to talk to you more broadly about artificial intelligence, which is the topic of our show today.
Yeah, very, very geeky topic on the App Stories Plus segment. We talked about CPUs and GPUs and AI, but we're going to talk about AI more broadly here on the main show. And I feel like it's our plan to talk about the specific implementations of AI-based tools in apps, but I also think it's impossible to avoid, covering the main topic first, like sort of this complicated mess that the world of AI is right now. And when we say AI, I mean, mostly we are referring to OpenAI, right? The actual company who's behind. And I mean, you may have seen this in the news. Everybody's talking about it. You may have heard of a ChatGPT, which is the sort of the main service we're going to talk about here. But OpenAI makes a bunch of other tools, right? They make Whisper, which is the one we talked about in the pre-show for App Stories Plus segment members. But they also make other open source AI projects that developers can implement in their apps, and they have an API which you can also use. But we're mostly going to talk about OpenAI, but Google is also entering this space with their own tech and with the Lambda language model that they announced years ago. And so far, they mostly kept quiet. And of course, Microsoft made a real big leap of faith in this market with their investment in the OpenAI company without actually acquiring OpenAI. They made a huge investment into the company. And as of last week, they announced their plans to roll out GPT integration in the Bing search engine as well as Microsoft Edge, their web browser. So it's complicated. Right.
It is. I guess I would add to what you just said that we also will talk a little bit, I think, about some of the image generation tools like DALL-E, which is OpenAI, and Stable Diffusion. So, I mean, I guess the areas that I have spent the most time focusing on with AI in recent months are images, image generation, text generation, and I guess audio to text conversion, which is also just another kind of text generation. This is generative AI that we're talking about, which has really caught on and become a hot topic, I think largely because it's been introduced in a way that is accessible to everyone through websites. I mean, AI is not a new topic, and these models aren't brand new. Like ChatGPT 3, which ChatGPT is based on, has been around for a while. But it wasn't until they created a chatbot that they put on the web where you can type prompts right into a web page and get something back right away, where this stuff really kind of caught the imagination of, I think, the mass media and a broader audience.
Right. So this idea of a chatbot isn't new per se. I mean, in the line of, in our job, I mean, we saw this years ago with remember chatbots, and like years ago, everybody was doing chatbots
for like less than a year, and then they all went away. There was like news. There wasn't. Remember, didn't Quartz start as a chatbot? The Quartz news service,
news website. Yes, I think that's absolutely the case. Like years ago, I want to say 5-6 years ago. And that was a Silicon Valley fad, really, because chatbots at the time were mostly a UI gimmick, right? It wasn't really artificial intelligence in the way that, and don't get me wrong, there is AI in Siri, but I would bet that the majority of people do not think of Siri as artificial intelligence. They think of Siri as an assistant with a set of like pre-made responses.
Yes, and those original chatbots were much more deterministic than these, even Siri is, in that it was really just a tree of responses based on the inputs that you gave it.
Exactly.
This episode of App Stories is brought to you by Sofa, the downtime organizer for the iPhone and iPad. Here's the thing. You've got limited downtime and infinite choices. How do you pick which movie, book, video game, music, podcast, or whatever you're going to start next? The app helps you be more intentional about your downtime by keeping your choices organized. Sofa's more organized than using a simple list in your Notes app because it's tailored specifically to the media you enjoy, bringing sanity and flexibility to how you spend your downtime. The app can handle apps, books, movies, podcasts, games, and a whole lot more. Sofa is free to download and comes with an extensive list of features. You can create unlimited lists, track your activity, automate with shortcuts, and sync everything across your devices, all for free. For more power, though, Sofa offers Super Sofa, a subscription that adds customized lists with cover images and descriptions, the ability to prioritize items on your lists with the shelf, sticky notes to help remind yourself of important tidbits of information about what you've saved, and the ability to customize the look and feel of the app with over 100 different themes. Start a 1-week free trial of Super Sofa today to see how it can help you become more intentional about your downtime by going to sofahq.com/appstories. Again, that URL is sofahq.com/appstories. There'll be a link in the show notes too. And if you're a Club Mac Stories member, be on the lookout for a Super Sofa giveaway in this week's issue of Mac Stories Weekly. Our thanks to Sofa for their support of the show.
So I think what's different here is that from an historical perspective, it was the arrival of these, I believe that the name is LLMs, large language models. Basically the idea that all of these machine learning models have been trained on lots and lots and lots of material, of written language, spoken language, images. Like in the pre-show, we talked about Whisper and how Whisper, which is audio to text, has been trained, I believe, on 680,000 hours of audio, which is an incredible amount of audio. And GPT, gosh, I don't even know how much data has gone into the language model behind ChatGPT. So this is unparalleled, and it was largely because of, I believe, Google were pioneers in this field. I believe they announced their large language models years ago, and it was also the Google, I believe, that they invented one of the key technologies that made these large language models possible, the transformer technology, which is also what's behind OpenAI. So this is profoundly different from the sort of quote-unquote AIs we've had so far. And you can immediately tell the difference. I mean, if you tried ChatGPT, you go to the website, you sign up, you create an account, you can use it for free. And you can tell, like, you type into this thing and you get back a response that sounds human. And it reads human, and it's flexible. It's got different flavors. It's got, it's every time you type something, the response can be slightly different. It's absolutely impressive, right? And it gives you, even though there are safeguards, right? And we're going to talk about this from an ethical and legal perspective. Even though there are safeguards, it gives you a surprising amount of freedom in terms of how you can phrase something you want to ask the AI in a way that sounds totally human. And I believe this is what you meant by the previous AIs like chatbots and even Siri, arguably, they were more deterministic and they were more rigid. Like with Siri and with previous chatbots, you needed to always sort of learn the syntax of those bots. With GPT, you can just talk. And you can just say, imagine that you are, or imagine this scenario, like just like you would talk to a person, and the AI actually understands with a really incredible degree of accuracy and credibility. It understands context, it understands what you're asking, and it understands how to follow up on those answers and questions. It's really remarkable.
This episode of App Stories is brought to you by Daylight. Daylight's not just some other CRM. It's the small business app that can grow with your business that Mac users love. If you run a small business, you know that it can be tough to stay on top of clients, leads, and projects that change with every day. But with Daylight in your corner, you can supercharge your team to collaborate better, handle more clients, close more deals, and execute more projects. Daylight's a native app built just for the Mac, iPhone, and iPad that's tightly integrated with Apple's tools that you already use, things like Apple Mail, Contacts, and Calendar. With Daylight, though, you can take your business game to the next level, managing clients, sales, and projects all in one place. Everything you do is organized, searchable, and accessible, whether or not you're online. This is a tool you owe it to yourself to check out. Get a 14-day free trial today at daylight.marketcircle.com/appstories. That's DAYLITE.marketcircle.com/appstories. There'll be a link in the show notes too. When you go there, use the promo code AppStories15% to get 15% off for the first 6 months when you subscribe to Daylight at daylight.marketcircle.com/appstories. Our thanks to Daylight for their support of the show.
All of this has led to many different types of controversies.
Right.
Including and mostly, so I think it's useful here to, like, now we're talking about ChatGPT, which is mostly text. We can have a separate conversation about Stable Diffusion and Midjourney and these other tools for images. They have similar but also kind of different problems. When it comes to GPT, I think, and this is more, we're going to get a bit philosophical here, so bear with me. I think it obviously raises the question, a couple of questions, like how was the artificial intelligence fed? Like, what kind of data did you give to this AI? And how did you balance some of the inherent biases in the data that you gave the AI? Simple example. How do you know that this AI is not political and is not leaning on a particular part of the political spectrum? How do you balance information? How do you check for bias? And not just when it comes to politics, right? But when it comes to race, to gender, to sexual orientation, to religion.
Sure, all kinds of things.
All kinds of things. How do you balance that bias?
The problem is it's scraping the internet, and the internet is full of awful stuff, right?
Exactly.
It's full of bias, it's full of misinformation, it's full of hate speech, it's full of all of those things. And you're now feeding a model that is, that's what it's built from now, which is problematic without some sort of guardrails and procedures built in to try to filter that out. But even the act of filtering that out, choices are made. Like, where do you draw, where is OpenAI drawing that line between one issue versus another?
Which is funny because arguably you could say, I have my own opinions here in this conversation. For as much as possible, I wouldn't like to take sides. I believe there are some things in which I take a particular side. But it's funny, and I'm going to play devil's advocate here. It's funny because if you think about it, the fact that the internet is full of misinformation and hate speech and awful stuff and, stuff that is simply not true, that is also a problem for us. Like, it's the AI right. is having the same growing pains that we as humans have had, living and working on the internet for the past decade. That's exactly sort of, and so the problem becomes, well, you as a person, do you want to stop using the internet because it's full of awful stuff? No, you don't.
But I will tell you that I think the problem, though, is this. The difference is this. When you get a response from ChatGPT, it responds to you in a very authoritative way that is essentially one step removed from the original source. So you as a person cannot evaluate the validity of that response in any kind of meaningful way. And that's what I think is at the root of a lot of these problems.
Yes. And you went exactly where I was hoping you would go. So this is where I'm going to get philosophical here. But I think it's necessary because it's such a weird and complex topic. So you could say that we the two of us, we are very online, right? As people, like we spend a ton of time on the internet. And over the course of the past, decades that we've been using the internet, we've been exposed to the internet. I don't know. Well, I was gonna say I don't know about you, but yes, I do know about you, John. We have a feel, right?
Yes.
When we see something that's like, we as humans, because we have that experience, because we've seen certain things many many times before, we have that feel, that like, I don't want to call it a sixth sense. Like, I don't mean to
It's
sound
like an
like a,
instinct to a degree,
it's
right?
like an instinct. It's like you see something, you're like, my BS detector here is, flying off the, like, it's
Very well tuned, yes.
very well tuned. But if you think about it, like, what is that quality? How do you describe that quality? And I think it's something that it's intrinsically human, right? I believe at the very core of this problem is the fact that when it comes to text, and again, I'm going to limit myself to text. We can talk about images later. When it comes to text, I think what's fundamentally different between how I think versus how GPT thinks is the things I know and the things I can learn, right, in my life are ultimately always informed by my previous experiences in real life, by my opinions, by my thoughts, by the fact that I can think, right? That I can change my mind or that I can make connections. And ultimately, that's also what makes humans flawed, right? Because we are not
Right.
machines, and we let our brains, our stupid brains, sometimes take control on the information that we, take in. And that's what makes us special and weird. But it's also what gives us those kinds of powers, like that feel of when you see something, like when you read an article, and maybe it's the design of a website, maybe it's the font, like stupid things, right? That
Right.
normally shouldn't count, but you see something and you go like, I, I'm not sure if I trust this. Or you see the way a person sends you an email and how they format that email, and you can tell, oh, that's a spammer, which is like, it's something uniquely human, I want to say. And that's what makes us special. The thing is, GPT, and we're going to link a bunch of articles that you also found in the show notes, John. Ultimately, this is just a very, very technically impressive system that takes in information, ingests a ton of data, can make some amazing connections about that data. But ultimately, it's always going to be a finite database. It's Even though it's large and vast and bigger than any previous language model, it's still a limited database made of things that humans created, right? And ultimately, the fact that the AI, at least so far, maybe in 5 years I'll be proven wrong, but it doesn't have the ability, and bear with me, this expression, the AI doesn't have the ability to get weird with
Hmm.
its thoughts, which is ultimately like the secret sauce behind human creativity, right? Making
Right.
weird things. And I think it's so at the very core of this problem when it comes to like all these conversations that we're having about GPT creating content. And I keep thinking, well, yeah, it's impressive that GPT can create content. Like we've seen examples of GPT writing emails or writing blog posts or writing, essays. But ultimately, you're still remixing something, words that you don't really know what they mean. You just know what they are, which is different, mind you. Knowing what a word is and what a word means is kind of different. You're just remixing information in millions of different ways, but that information was created by a human. And so without the human, I'm not sure what else you could create. Does this make sense to you?
It does. And I think of it in part, and this is, I mean, we should acknowledge that, you and I are both writers, and I suppose at least some people think that ChatGPT is a threat to writers. So we have that bias, and we can talk about that a little bit. I'm not particularly worried at the moment, but in any event, I think as a writer, though, it comes down to the idea of communication and connection with people. And when you have a system that is stringing together words in a meaningful way, in the sense that they're grammatically accurate and readable, but they're statistically based because the word choice is based on statistical models of what is
Yes.
likely to come next based on this large model. You lose the communication aspect of it, I think. And I wrote about this for the monthly log in for Club Mac Stories members, where I went in and I asked it to write some reviews of some apps that I'm really familiar with, like Sofa, who's one of our sponsors today, by the way. And it was right. It got a lot of the features, but it didn't have any opinions.
Yep.
It didn't really explain why one part of the app might be good for one person versus another, or have any criticisms about where its shortcomings were, right?
Yeah.
And to me, that's the benefit of real original writing and creativity and communication, is those opinions and feelings and that sort of communication that you can't get, at least not right now with ChatGPT.
At least not right now. And maybe we'll be proven wrong. But I'm going to give you a very practical and immediate example of why I still think that human creativity is sort of impossible to, put in a bottle and ship as ChatGPT. As you were talking 30 seconds ago, my brain made a connection. When you said that GPT described Sofa and all of its features, but it didn't have an opinion, the connection my brain made, and I wanted to interrupt you, but I'll let you finish, and so I saved this thought, was like, that reminds me of the typical guy on Reddit who's like, I want to have video game reviews that are objective. And like, there's always like that meme of the guy on Reddit who asks for the objective review. And it can be a video game, it can be an iPhone or an Android phone, whatever. But that's what makes me, that's what makes me human. The fact that you were saying something and my brain made a connection to something that when I say it out loud, it makes sense to you. But it's impossible to explain as an algorithm right now because, like, how did you make that connection? Why did you want to make that joke? I don't know. It just happened. So these kinds of things, right? I believe I see a lot of my colleagues, as you said, like being concerned that GPT is going to replace us. And I think there's definitely, I'm going to tell you, I'm super comfortable with this because I think that there's absolutely a market for call them blogs that are not made by humans, and they just give you a list of things, and those things were written by an AI. And I think there's people out there who want to have just a factual list of unopinionated details about products. And if so, you're going to have a great time with those sort of publications. I think
they're going to take over the SEO world of listicles will be dominated by AI for sure.
Absolutely. But I also think that there's always going to be a market out there for people who want to have a bit more color in all kinds of media. And not just about blogs, but in music. I mean, if you want, today, right now, you can find AI-generated music. You can find AI-generated videos and paintings, of course. But I also feel like, and I believe it's, nothing is going to change my mind on this, that humans ultimately, they crave feel. That's all this is, like this entire conversation for me, like the buck stops here, as you folks in America like to say, like the buck stops for me at the fact that ultimately, sure, GPT, AI is going to be incredible for a bunch of things, but ultimately, you are going to crave that something that makes you tingle inside, that makes you, and
exactly.
I don't think this is too philosophical, actually. I think this is why people go to concerts. I think this is why people, want to drink a really good wine. These are seemingly, or want to go to the movies, or they go on vacations. These are seemingly unrelated things, and sure, they are different types of activities, but deep down, you do those things because they make you feel something. And the thing about the AI is that it doesn't feel anything, which is fine because it's an instrument, it's a tool. And if we use it as a tool, I think it can be of great benefit to all of us. But for me, and this sort of leads into the next topic, for me, the debate around AI for creativity versus AI as a tool, I do not believe in AI for creativity, because I think that the AI can remix and it can create, but it cannot create with feel, with an opinion.
Right.
It cannot create with joy, with pain. Some of the greatest artistic creations in our history were made out of pain and sadness and grief. And the AI doesn't know about those feelings, and so you can create and you can remix, but it doesn't make you feel anything.
Yeah, no, I agree with you 100% on that, Federico. And I think that that's an important distinction, is the difference between creativity and a tool. Because while we're being very critical of AI at the moment, I do think that there are meaningful uses for it as a tool. And that's part of what we talked about in the Plus segment today when we were talking about doing conversion of audio to text. And I think, a lot of this stuff there are couple of things, I guess before we get to the apps, I want to say. One is, I think that this topic in general is a very typical cycle in the Silicon Valley hype machine. In that all of a sudden, last year it was crypto and NFTs. This year it's artificial intelligence. It's like one of these things is
for something new. Yeah.
Right. There's always something that they're willing to hype beyond all reasonable expectations. And while I do think that artificial intelligence is going to have a dramatic impact on our world, I don't think that it solves every computing problem that we have and is going to replace everything, which is kind of where the overheated discussion is right now. And I think it is worth thinking about, and it is worth kind of considering whether or not it's being overhyped, which I think it absolutely is. There are definite limits, and it'll get better, but I still don't think it's going to replace the kinds of things that you were talking about.
Yeah.
And secondly, especially when it comes to the idea of the web and writing, I would really recommend a story called ChatGPT is a Blurry JPEG of the Web, in the New Yorker, which is a story by Ted Chiang, who is a science fiction writer. And this is an analogy, which his analogy, and you got to read this story because to me, it made a lot of things click, because it was comparing a blurry JPEG, which removes a lot of the information from an image, to ChatGPT, which takes all the information of the web, crunches it down, and loses a lot of the meaning in the process. And I think it's an analogy, so it doesn't work on all levels, but in a lot of ways it works super well. And for me, it kind of put a lot of things in an interesting new light and perspective.
Yeah. And something I want to clarify. I think being critical of AI for creation, but more than that, I don't see myself as being critical of AI. I think many times we as humans, we cut ourselves short. We should believe in our species more. And I think many of us, we see this arrival of AI, and many of us are like, oh, we're doomed. And we don't understand, like we don't appreciate, I think, our potential for creative tasks as much as we should. I think we should understand that there's many things that make us special. And it's why over the course of human history, we have been through multiple industrial revolutions. And at the end, we've always managed, right? Because we always find, all right, cool. So I'm not supposed to load coal into the machine to make steam anymore. On to the next task that
Right.
I, as a human, can perform. And we always manage. And I don't know, I tend to be an optimistic person by nature. So maybe that's also part of the conversation here. But I also want to say that as humans, we have always... we've always been searching for tools and instruments. I mean, it's if you go back to prehistoric era. Like humans have always made tools. Humans are tool makers and builders, and our ancestors were making arrows out of stones and knives out of tree branches or whatever. Like we've always built tools to simplify our lives so that we could do something else. Mostly, if you study philosophy, if you study Freud would argue that ultimately all that we do is basically to for having relationships with other humans, and which is another part of philosophy. But I digress. Anyway, we have always tried to make tools, and I believe this latest version of AI, it's incredible for being a tool of assistance. Let me give you some practical examples. One of the fantastic features of GPT that I love and that I actually want to make a shortcut for is grammar checking. It's incredible. You can ask GPT, it's like, hey, I wrote this. Can you check it for spelling errors or for grammatical errors or whatever? And it'll tell you. And it'll also explain to you why that's an error. And see, that's the kind of thing where I, as a human, have an idea. I want to write a novel. I want to write an essay or a blog post. I have ideas and I have my hands and I type on the keyboard. Okay, I'm getting my story, my idea out of my head. I'm not supposed to check for errors. That's a boring thing. Like humans are not well suited for those kinds of boring tasks, which is why we'll always build tools that can help us. And so I fundamentally believe that GPT and, Google is working on Bard, which they announced a day before Microsoft, out of fear, I suppose.
Panic.
I don't know. Out of panic, maybe. I fundamentally believe that AI for when it comes to text editing tasks or just summarization. I mean, GPT is incredible for summarization. Those kinds of features are exactly why we should continue investing on these sort of tools. And I think it's also where you and I, in specific apps and services, where we have found the most utility. That's just my opinion.
This episode of App Stories is brought to you by Squarespace. Squarespace is the all-in-one platform for building your brand and growing your business online. You can stand out with a beautiful website, engage with your audience, and sell anything, your products, services, and even the content you create. Squarespace has got you covered. With Squarespace, you can use insights to grow your business. If you've ever wondered where your site's visitors and sales are coming from and which channels are most effective, you can analyze all of that in Squarespace. Once you've got the data, you can improve your website and build a marketing strategy based on your top keywords and most popular products and content. You can also sell your products on an online store. Whether you sell physical or digital goods, Squarespace has the tools you need to start selling online. Plus, you can get started with a best-in-class website template and customize it to fit your needs. It's as easy as browsing the category of your business to find the perfect starting place, and you can customize it with just a few clicks. Having a website, a place where people can go to find more about what you do and what you offer, is critical when you're starting out working on the web. Whether you're running a small business, whether you're a freelancer, whatever you do, when people find you, whether it's through social media or some other contact, having a place where they can go to learn more is one of the most important things. And the way you do that is building a website. And the best thing about Squarespace is you don't need to be a web developer to get that kind of thing up and running quickly without a lot of hassle. Squarespace makes it incredibly easy and affordable. So before you start your first big project or put your shingle out for your new business, visit Squarespace and check out what they have to offer and build yourself a beautiful website. Head on over to squarespace.com/appstories for a free trial with no credit card required. And when you're ready to launch, use the offer code AppStories to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. That's squarespace.com/appstories. And when you decide to sign up, use that offer code AppStories to get 10% off your first purchase so that they know you came from our show. Our thanks to Squarespace for their support of app stories.
Before we get to the apps, John, there's one more thing I want to point out, which is the question about ownership and intellectual property and copyright when it comes to AI. Now, as you said, GPT works by taking in the entire web, basically. Blog posts, scientific papers, images, websites, Reddit threads was also recently discovered.
Right.
All kinds of things you can, if it's on the internet, the GPT will take it in. And now, of course, this raises questions, right? I raise this question about like, okay, if you were trained on an article that I wrote for profit on my website, and now that information is part of your larger body of intelligence, should I be compensated because I unintentionally trained you? This will become a problem, and you will see this controversy pop up in the near future, in the very near future, as soon as Microsoft opens up the new Bing search engine with GPT 3.5 integration. And one of the features of the Bing search engine will be these snippets that the AI will use to summarize whatever you're searching for. And that information comes from websites. And sure, Microsoft is going to have attribution for the sources that are powering the response, the answer provided by Bing and GPT, with tiny clickable footnotes that will take you to the original website that inadvertently gave the information to GPT. And I can tell you, John, nobody is going to click on those links. Nobody is going to click to see the source. They will get a giant answer by GPT at the top of the window, and that's going to be it. Most people are going to be totally fine with it.
I think one of the places this came up most recently, which I thought was really interesting, there was an article in Futurism that I just sent to you in iMessage, which they went through and analyzed CNET's AI journalist, which CNET was publishing stories on financial topics like how to, invest your money or open an IRA or all these kinds of things. And they were using AI to generate these, and they were checked, I guess, by humans in at least most cases. But there was a study done, and they looked at them, and they're pretty clearly plagiarized from some very specific other websites in terms of you look at them side by side, the structure, the style, and everything is very similar to these other sites. And that just to me shows that maybe this AI is not quite as comprehensive or as smart as people think it is. It's just regurgitating something without attribution that someone else created on another website.
Yeah. All right. So one of the things I also wanted to cover, and I'm realizing now that we have so much to say about like setting the stage for an AI discussion that I think it's probably best for us and for our listeners if we just do apps and services and browsers next week. I realize we've been talking for almost an hour about like the core ideas and principles and concepts behind modern AI. So I think we're going to split this in two, and we're going to talk about apps and services, very specific examples of features in next week's episode of App Stories. So in the meantime, I guess we have our list of apps and services with interesting GPT and Stable Diffusion and other machine learning based integrations. If you have recommendations for apps that you've seen with those features, send them to us. We can add them to our roundup for the next episode.
Yeah, that would be great, Federico. I'd love to get everybody's recommendations. Before we get to images, I do want to raise a couple other things about attribution and the way things work with the web, because there are a lot of interesting issues here. One is just straight up, what happens when the search engine is now returning you full-on detailed answers? Are people going to click those links? Now, Satya Nadella seems to think that they will, because, for what Windows is going to do, what Microsoft is going to do with Edge and its tools is it's going to footnote the sources. And this has been demoed to a bunch of journalists. The problem is, I think you and I both know people aren't going to click those links. There's going to be less traffic to those sites. And thank goodness we don't rely on that kind of click traffic in the same way that a lot of sites do. But I think that a lot of websites are going to see their traffic reduced as a result of these tools, which then begs the question is if they don't get as much traffic and they don't get the the ad impressions, will they survive, and will there be more content to feed to the machine? Because if the machine kills the source of the information, then the machine is eating itself essentially.
Yes.
And the secondary issue to that, which I wonder whether it's solvable with, we've talked a lot about ChatGPT, but it's not the only, AI intelligence out there that's, using the web to come up with various models, is what happens when these models start learning based on misinformation created by the models themselves. And this is what goes back to that article that I mentioned about it being like a blurry JPEG, which is if you take a JPEG and you compress it over and over and over again using the compression algorithms, it just gets blurrier and blurrier and blurrier and less accurate. And I could see the same thing happening with text. Now, obviously, I'm not a computer scientist. Maybe they have this figured out and we'll figure it out. But I do think that feeding the results of artificial intelligence back into the artificial intelligence creates a loop that could be dangerous.
Yeah. If you think about it, it becomes a form of digital cannibalism, where basically you're eating yourself, and you're eating. If GPT is ingesting GPT generated content, it's just
first it kills off the websites with the original content, then it feeds on itself. It becomes a mess. Yeah. Another, I guess, finally, before we get to the images, is I want to mention code because. Microsoft has already had something called Copilot with GitHub out there, and I need to look into where things stand with this. But I know that the open source software community sued Microsoft over this because those, a lot of the projects in GitHub are MIT licensed, which require attribution, and Copilot wasn't offering attribution, and so they sued them based on copyright violations. So there's a lot of interesting legal issues. I think it's going to be a while before we get any answers from the court system as to where this falls in terms of fair use or not fair use. But it's an issue across the board, whether you're talking about images, computer code, text, whatever it happens to be.
Yeah. When it comes to images, this is where I personally draw the line. You may have seen all these tools that turn text into images. So you give the AI a text prompt, and it spits back multiple versions, multiple visual interpretations of that prompt. The leading models in this field are Stable Diffusion and Midjourney and DALL-E, I want to say. All of them are really... there's differences between them. There's difference in the styles and in the sort of... obviously, the models that they're based on. But the general idea is that they were fed images from all kinds of sources, from museums, from the internet, from, DeviantArt, from Reddit, from Instagram, from all kinds of places. And they can turn your description into a particular type of image, whether it's a painting or an illustration, a drawing, a 3D render, whatever you want it to be. Now, my main issue here is that when it comes to, I have this problem, like I said a few minutes ago, when it comes to the AI creating text content. But by nature of the visual medium, this problem is only exacerbated even more when it comes to creating images, creating paintings and portraits and, whatever it is. Because you can explicitly ask the AI something like, make this, in the style of artist John Borges, and the AI, who's being trained on images effectively stolen by that artist's portfolio page, maybe, is gonna produce an image with techniques and styles lifted for free from a particular artist's webpage or profile page, whatever. And this, raises a ton of copyright and ownership red flags, obviously. We have already seen examples of the popular stock photo company, Getty Images. They sued
Yes.
Stable Diffusion, I believe, both in the UK and in the US. So I am very, I don't know, I don't like this. I am impressed by how it all works, technically speaking, behind the scenes. Because especially when you run it on a GPU or a very high performance CPU, like it is impressive that you can turn a text prompt into an image. But knowing that those images, those millions of images, were just lifted from somebody else's work to make new quote unquote art that is not art, is just an engine spitting out content. It makes me feel very just sad and upset.
Yeah. What do you think, though, Federico? I mean, just to kind of play devil's advocate, is it a matter of degree that it bothers you? I mean, how is it? Is it different? I guess you know what I mean.
How is it different from text?
Yeah, exactly. Is it really different, or is it more striking because it's visual?
I think it's more striking because it's visual. I think the being able to see something as one of our primary ways to experience the world. It's seeing something. It evokes a stronger reaction than reading something. So that's part of it. And I also think that just seeing the result in color with different styles, it hits you different than say, oh yeah, maybe this post was written in the style of this popular journalist.
Right.
But seeing a painting, seeing a drawing, seeing a photo in the style of somebody else, you can immediately tell, like, oh wow, yeah, I can see that. So by the nature of the sense of sight itself, like it hits you in a much more striking way.
Yeah, I think it raises an interesting issue too, because the fact that you can say to do it in the style of a particular person narrows the field of what is being used to create the image in a way that feels less like fair use. Whereas if it's just I don't know, create an image of a dog drinking a margarita, which in fact I just sent you, that I created with DALL-E. It's just pulling like random images of margaritas and dogs and putting them together in some way. Whereas if it's in the style of a famous, if it's in the style of a famous artist, then it really does feel like it's taking away from that artist. Yeah. When you say their style, it's like that's in a lot of ways their the emotional content that they bring to a particular piece of art, what makes them different from another famous artist. And there's a good, I'll put it in the show notes. There's a good episode of Hard Fork with Casey Newton and Kevin Roos, where they have an interview with an artist who's a woman who does a web comic, and I forget her name off the top of my head, but she has sued Stable Diffusion and is part of, I think, a class action, because you can go on Stable Diffusion and have it create comics in the style of this artist, and they look strikingly like her art. And that really does potentially disrupt a lot of illustrators and other people who are in that profession. And I think that that's something we need to also keep in mind here, is that, while we're talking about the range of different things that AI brings and what it can be used for and what it's good at, what maybe it should not be used for, what is helpful for, no matter what, there's going to be some disruption that happens as a result of these technologies. And I think anytime that we replace one tool with another, this goes all the way back to replacing the horse and carriage with motor vehicles. You have to be cognizant of the impact it's going to have on people who are in various lines of work. And plan that into how you're implementing this. It might be good that at the end of the day, we can use some of these tools for certain tasks, but it is going to have a negative impact on people too. And I think we need to be cognizant of that and plan for it. All right, Federico, that's a good conversation. We'd love to hear some of your suggestions for apps that incorporate artificial intelligence in some way. It doesn't have to be an app that's all about artificial intelligence. It could be something that just has a component or a feature, because I know that from our list, we've got a lot of those in there as well. So send those in and let us know about it on Mastodon or send us an email. I want to thank our 3 sponsors for this episode again. That's Sofa, Daylight, and Squarespace. You can find me and Federico over on Mastodon. We've got special URLs that'll take you right to our profile pages, so you can just open those in a browser, click on follow, and you're following us. Federico's is vitici.macstories.net, and mine is johnvorhees.macstories.net. You can, of course, also find us at macstories.net right away, and on Instagram, where Federico is at Vitici, that's VITICCI, and I'm at John Voorhees, JOHNVOORHWS. Talk to you next week, Federico.
Ciao, John.